built this business, but his own employee refuses to serve him. Louis Thompson, the visionary force behind the beloved coffee empire Golden Brew, wasn't just another high-flying CEO chasing profits. He was a man on a mission. From day one, he built his business on values that truly mattered: inclusivity, exceptional service, and real opportunities for all. His goal? To create a space where every customer felt like they belonged and every employee treated people with kindness, no matter who walked through the doors. But success has a way of distancing leaders from the everyday reality of their businesses, and Louis knew that better than anyone. He couldn't shake one nagging question: were his employees truly living up to these values, or had they become just words on a company mission statement? There was only one way to find out. So, instead of relying on reports and polished presentations, Louis decided to go straight to the source. By stepping into the shoes of an ordinary employee, one evening Louis decided to see things for himself. No board meetings, no filtered reports, just the raw, unpolished truth. So, he pulled on a simple hoodie and a pair of worn-in jeans, ditching his usual tailored suits. That night, he walked into one of Golden Brew's busiest city branches, not as the CEO, but as just another customer. The moment he stepped inside, the air was alive with energy. The rich aroma of freshly brewed coffee swirled around him, blending with the hum of conversations and the rhythmic clatter of cups meeting countertops. The baristas moved like clockwork, filling orders, calling out names, flashing rehearsed smiles. Louis soaked it in, his heart swelling with pride, until something caught his eye. Behind the counter, a blonde employee stood rigid, her smile strained. It wasn't just exhaustion. There was something off. Her eyes darted toward a group of customers near the register, young, casually dressed, perhaps students. As they stepped up to order, her posture shifted, her tone cooled. The warmth she'd shown to the previous customer, an older businessman in a sharp suit, was gone. Louis watched closely. A knot tightened in his stomach. Was this subtle favoritism? A moment of unconscious bias? Whatever it wasn't what Golden Brew stood for. His undercover visit had just taken an unexpected turn. Louis took a step closer, his warm smile aimed at the blonde barista behind the counter. The name tag pinned to her apron read Karen, but unlike the rest of the bustling staff, she wasn't rushing to fill orders or greeting customers with enthusiasm. Instead, she leaned lazily on the counter, eyes glued to her phone, scrolling as if the growing line in front of her didn't exist. The customers shifted impatiently, some exchanging frustrated glances. Louis hesitated for a moment before speaking, keeping his tone polite but firm. "Excuse me," he said with a friendly nod. "Could I get some help, please?" Karen barely looked up. With an exaggerated sigh, she rolled her eyes, her fingers still tapping at her screen. "I'm busy," she muttered flatly. "Go wait like everyone else." Louis blinked, momentarily stunned. He wasn't expecting red carpet treatment, but outright rudeness? That was something else. Stepping back into the line, he folded his arms, watching carefully. Karen continued to scroll, indifferent to the irritated customers waiting in front of her. A few people sighed loudly, but no one confronted her. This wasn't just bad service, it was a culture problem, one that went against everything Golden Brew stood for. And Louis was about to do something about it. After a long moment, Karen finally stuffed her phone into her apron and started helping customers. But as Louis observed her, something unsettling became clear. Her energy shifted depending on who stood in front of her. When white customers approached, she greeted them with warmth, flashing a polite smile, chatting as she took their orders. But the moment customers of color stepped up, her demeanor changed. Her tone turned cold, her movements rushed, and she barely made eye contact before pushing their orders along. The tension in the air thickened. Some customers seemed to notice, exchanging quiet glances, while others shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Louis remained patient, waiting for his turn. He needed to see for himself. Was this a momentary lapse or something deeper? Finally, he stepped up to the counter again, his expression neutral but his mind racing. "Hi," he said, keeping his tone warm and friendly. "I'd like a medium latte, please." Karen barely looked at him. Her fingers hovered over the register, her voice clipped. "Name?" she asked, already sounding impatient. Louis met her gaze, his next words deliberate. "Louis," he said, watching for any sign of recognition. If she knew who he was, she didn't show it. But she was about to find out. "Please?" Louis said, keeping his voice even. Karen didn't bother looking up. "We're out of that," she said flatly, already turning her attention elsewhere. Louis frowned. Just moments ago, he had watched her make the exact same drink for another customer. Without hesitation. "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Karen finally lifted her gaze, eyes narrowing slightly. Crossing her arms, she let out a dramatic sigh, as if he were testing her patience. "Try another store," she snapped. For a moment, everything seemed to slow. Conversations quieted, a few customers shifted awkwardly, pretending not to notice. The tension in the air was thick, pressing. Louis felt an unexpected wave of emotions. Disbelief, disappointment, and something deeper. This wasn't just bad service. It was a fundamental failure of the culture he had worked so hard to build. Without another word, he gave a small nod and turned toward the door. He had seen enough. But this wasn't over. Enough. This wasn't just about poor customer service. It was about something much deeper, something far more troubling. As Louis walked back to his car, his mind raced with questions. How many other customers had been treated this way? How many had walked out of his stores feeling disrespected, unwelcome, less than? This wasn't the business he had built. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Louis had left the store without revealing who he really was, without calling Karen out or demanding an explanation. But inside, he was deeply unsettled. This wasn't just about one rude employee. This was about a culture that had been allowed to slip through the cracks. And now, it was his responsibility to fix it. This wasn't just bad service. This was blatant discrimination, something Louis had worked tirelessly to keep out of Golden Brew. Back at headquarters, he wasted no time. He pulled up customer feedback and employee reports from the very branch he had visited, determined to get to the bottom of it. What he found only deepened his frustration. A troubling pattern emerged. Complaints of rude service, dismissive attitudes, and unfair treatment. Time and time again, customers mentioned a blonde employee. Some even admitted they had stopped visiting that location because they felt unwelcome, because of their race. Louis exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. It didn't take long to connect the dots. Karen had a history, and now it was time to do something about it. The deeper Louis dug, the worse it got. Not only had Karen's behavior been a recurring issue, but there was something else. Jessica, the store manager, had never filed a single official report about it. Determined to understand why, Louis called Jessica in for a private meeting. At first she was hesitant, shifting uncomfortably in her chair. But after a moment of silence, she finally admitted the truth. "I have noticed Karen's behavior," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I didn't say anything." Louis didn't interrupt. He let her continue. "Karen's popular with some of the staff," Jessica added nervously. "If I called her out, I was afraid it would cause tension. I didn't want to make things worse." Louis studied her carefully. He could hear the guilt in her voice, the fear of rocking the boat. He took a deep breath, keeping his tone calm but firm. "Jessica," he said, "creating a fair and respectful workplace isn't about avoiding tension. It's about doing what's right." She nodded slowly, eyes downcast. "And right now," Louis continued, "we have a real problem, one that has to be addressed." Jessica swallowed hard. She knew he was right. And now there was no avoiding it. Louis knew that creating a welcoming workplace was far more important than avoiding conflict. He thanked Jessica for her honesty but made it clear, allowing this kind of behavior to go unchecked was no longer an option. With her cooperation, he began planning his next move. 1 week later, Lewis returned to the very Golden Brew branch he had visited undercover. But this time, he wasn't in a hoodie and jeans. Dressed sharply in a tailored suit, he walked in confidently, flanked by a small team of executives. The effect was immediate. The moment they entered, the atmosphere shifted. The bustling store seemed to freeze. Customers paused mid-sip, their eyes darting toward the group, while employees exchanged nervous glances. The tension was palpable, the energy in the air heavy with anticipation. Lewis remained calm, his expression unreadable, as he made his way to the counter. He had a point to prove, not just to Karen, but to everyone watching. The staff stood frozen, caught in a mix of curiosity and unease. Karen, still oblivious to the shift in the air, was casually chatting with another employee, her eyes glued to her phone. She didn't seem to notice Lewis until his voice rang out, steady and commanding, cutting through the murmur of the room. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" The room fell silent. Eyes turned toward him, some out of curiosity, others out of concern. The chatter from the employees died down quickly as they moved toward the seating area, the weight of the moment hanging heavy in the air. Karen, still half distracted by her phone, didn't immediately react until the realization hit her. Slowly, her eyes lifted, and the color drained from her face as she recognized the figure standing at the front. Her eyes widened. She quickly shoved her phone into her pocket, her posture shifting awkwardly as she straightened up, the casual air she'd had moments ago evaporating. "My name is Lewis Thompson," he began, his voice sharp and unwavering. "I'm the CEO of Golden Brew." A collective gasp filled the room. The tension skyrocketed. This wasn't just a typical meeting. As Karen froze, her face draining of color, Lewis scanned the room, his eyes briefly flicking over the staff before finally landing on her. He took a slow breath, the weight of the moment settling in. "Last week," he began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of authority, "I visited this store undercover. I wanted to see for myself how customers were treated." The room fell utterly silent. Every eye was on him, some filled with shock, others with anticipation. Lewis's gaze locked onto Karen's, and for a brief moment, the air between them crackled. "What I experienced was unacceptable," he continued, his voice unwavering. "I was ignored, dismissed, and lied to. And after reviewing the complaints, I'm not the only one." Karen's breath caught in her throat. Her voice trembled as she stammered, I didn't know it was you." Lewis raised a hand, silencing her before she could say more. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said, his tone cutting through the tension. "Every customer deserves respect, not just the ones you think are important." The room seemed to hold its breath, the weight of his words hanging over them. This wasn't just a reprimand. It was a reckoning. Karen's usual confidence had all but evaporated. Her words came out in weak, stumbling excuses, but it was painfully obvious that they wouldn't save her now. The room could feel it. Her defense was crumbling, and with it, any hope of evading the consequences of her actions. Lewis took a deep breath, his gaze unwavering as he addressed the entire team. Golden Brew was built on the idea that everyone is welcome. His voice was calm, but there was an undeniable weight behind it. "This behavior has no place here, and it will not be tolerated." As Karen sat in stunned silence, Lewis knew that this moment wasn't just about her. It was a statement to everyone in the room, a statement about what Golden Brew truly stood for. He stood tall at the front of the room, his posture firm yet composed, making sure every single employee felt the gravity of his words. "This isn't just about a single mistake," he continued, his tone clear and resolute. "It's about ensuring that every person who walks through these doors, whether they're customers or employees, knows they are valued and treated with respect." The silence stretched on, and Lewis's message echoed throughout the room. This wasn't just a lesson for Karen, it was a declaration to everyone that the standards of his company had no room for discrimination. "Let me make one thing clear," Lewis said, his voice steady, every word cutting through the silence like a blade. "Racism and poor service have no place at Golden Brew. Our mission is to create a welcoming environment for everyone, and that mission will not be compromised." The room was frozen, every pair of eyes locked on him. The air seemed thick with anticipation, the weight of his words settling on everyone present. He paused for a moment, allowing the magnitude of his statement to sink in. Then he turned his attention fully to Karen, who was nervously fidgeting with her name tag, her face pale and filled with dread. "Karen," Lewis continued, his tone unwavering, "your behavior last week and the complaints I've reviewed show a clear pattern of disrespect and discrimination. That is unacceptable, and I cannot allow it to continue." The room held its breath. Karen's hands trembled slightly as her head dropped, unable to meet his gaze. She knew what was coming. Lewis didn't look away. This wasn't just a consequence for Karen. This was about reinforcing the values of the company and holding people accountable to them. Karen's face turned pale. "Wait," she stammered, panic rising in her voice. "I can change. It won't happen again, I swear." But Lewis shook his head slowly, his expression unwavering. "I gave you the chance to do the right thing with every customer you served," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You chose not to." He let that hang in the air for a moment, watching her eyes dart around the room, desperate for some sign of support. But there was none. "Effective immediately," he said, his tone final. "You're no longer employed at Golden Brew." Karen gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. She looked around at her co-workers, searching for anyone to speak up, to intervene, but no one did. The room remained silent. Lewis didn't look away. This was the consequence of her actions. He turned to Jessica, the store manager, who stood nearby, her face a mix of concern and uncertainty. "Jessica," Lewis said, his tone softening just slightly, "I understand the challenges you've faced, but as a leader, it's your responsibility to ensure this workplace reflects our values. I'm giving you the opportunity to step up, to lead by example, and to make sure something like this never happens again." Jessica nodded, her shoulders tense. She knew this was her moment, her chance to prove she could take control and make the change Lewis was demanding. Jessica nodded, a mix of relief and determination now in her eyes. She knew this was her turning point. Lewis explained that, moving forward, Jessica would receive additional training on team management and leadership. "You'll have the tools to succeed," he assured her, "and we'll provide company-wide support to make sure this store becomes a positive space for everyone." The room seemed to breathe a little easier, though the gravity of the moment still hung thick in the air. Lewis wasn't done. He turned to address the entire team, his voice taking on a more resolute tone. "Starting today," he announced, "we're implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for every employee across all Golden Brew locations. These sessions will focus not only on treating every customer with respect, but also on creating a culture that ensures Golden Brew remains a welcoming space for everyone." The room was still, the weight of his words sinking in. Lewis looked around at the staff, eyes meeting those of his employees. Each one was now being held accountable. "We're committed to making real change," he continued. "And I expect each of you to embrace this mission, to help build a workplace where respect and equality are non-negotiable." The shift was happening, and Lewis wasn't going to let anything stand in the way. "We will create a space where everyone feels welcome," Lewis declared, his voice unwavering. "We will not wait for problems to arise, we will address them proactively." His words lingered in the air, a promise to his team and to everyone who walked through the doors of Golden Brew. As expected, word of the incident spread quickly. A few customers who had witnessed the confrontation shared the story online, and soon social media exploded with praise for Lewis's swift and decisive action against discrimination. The comments poured in, flooding social media platforms with admiration for Lewis's leadership. People from all over applauded Golden Brew for standing firm in its values. It wasn't just a business decision, it was a movement, a company that cared, that acted. And it wasn't just online chatter. The changes Lewis implemented began to take root. Employees took the new training seriously, and the atmosphere at Golden Brew locations across the city started to shift. The tension that once hung in the air was replaced with a growing sense of accountability. Almost immediately, the difference was visible. Customers felt more valued, employees interacted with more confidence, and the sense of community inside the stores grew stronger. Immediately, customers began to notice the improved atmosphere at the coffee shop. Many expressed their gratitude to the staff, thanking them for the positive changes and the welcoming environment. Word spread quickly, and the local community, once wary of the branch, began returning in greater numbers. Business flourished, but for Lewis, the true reward wasn't in the increasing sales or the rise in foot traffic. It was in the shift he had witnessed. The change from tension and division to respect and unity. For him, this experience was a powerful reminder of why he had started Golden Brew in the first place. To create a business that not only served great coffee, but also stood for something greater. He had always dreamed of building a place where people felt welcome, where every interaction was grounded in respect, and where values weren't just something written on a wall, but lived and breathed by every employee. As he reflected on the progress they'd made, Lewis realized just how vital leadership was, not just in terms of strategy or vision, but in how decisions shaped the culture of an entire company. One moment, one decision could change the direction of everything. It was a responsibility he didn't take lightly. One afternoon, as he sat in his office overlooking the bustling city, he thought about how far Golden Brew had come. During a visit to another store, Lewis noticed a young black barista working diligently behind the counter. As their eyes met, the barista's face lit up with recognition. "You're Mr. Thompson," the young man said, his voice filled with excitement. "You're the reason I wanted to work here." Lewis smiled, touched by the words. There was something deeply rewarding about knowing that the company he had built and the values it stood for had inspired someone in such a meaningful way. Spending the afternoon with the young barista, Lewis found himself offering advice on leadership and success, sharing stories from his own journey and offering guidance on how to overcome challenges. They spoke about resilience, about striving to be the best version of themselves, and about the impact of positive leadership. As they talked, Lewis felt a profound sense of pride, not just in the company he had built, but in the example he had set. He had always hoped Golden Brew would be more than a business. It was a place where people could grow, where they could learn and make a real impact on the world. In that moment, he understood more clearly than ever before that real change didn't come from grand gestures or corporate policies alone. It came from action, consistent, everyday action that inspired others to rise to their best. And Lewis was committed to continuing that work, one conversation, one example at a time. He knew that leadership wasn't just about guiding a company, it was about inspiring others to lead too. Golden Brew wasn't just a coffee shop. It had become a symbol, a beacon of inclusivity, equality, and the power of doing what was right. For Lewis, that transformation was the most important achievement of all. It wasn't the accolades, the growing number of stores, or the expanding customer base that filled him with the deepest sense of accomplishment. It was knowing that every day, in every Golden Brew location, people were experiencing something more than just great coffee. They were experiencing a culture rooted in respect, fairness, and opportunity. Lewis had built something meaningful, and as long as he kept leading with purpose, he knew that Golden Brew would continue to inspire change, not just within his company, but in the hearts of everyone who walked through its doors. Thanks for watching. This has been Narratives by Dan. For more inspiring stories like this, please like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.